they made this the policy that they sort of wanted to die on a ditch in.
Yeah.
And, there's lots of people up and down the country who would say, yes, immigration is important to a group of people. But actually, if you look at most of the polling that's been done over the course of the past year or so, and actually if you look at a poll we did over Christmas, which kind of looked at really what the issues are that people care about, immigration was not one of the top two issues.
Busy week.
Kind of weird week. It was busy.
Yeah.
It seemed like a whole psychodrama unfolding, and now we seem to have gone pretty quiet
Well,
again.
it's what seems to keep happening over Rwanda. You have this massive psychodrama that everyone goes, but it might not lead to much, and it doesn't lead to much. Where is the party now, looking back on the sort of Rwanda debate? Is it done and dusted? Are the divisions still there? Are the resignations going to mean that there's like someone like Lee Anderson? Is he going to carry on to being a problem, or is he going to keep quiet? What's going on basically?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same story that we saw just before Christmas, really. There were lots of people throwing their toys out of the pram over the Rwanda issue. They wanted the bill to be toughened up. They went some way to doing that by laying all these amendments and voting against the government. And then when it came to the big crunch, which was backing or not backing third reading, they all fell into line. And I mean, look, there's still unhappiness about the drafting of the bill. They still think that the government could have gone further. Of course, this is really the first step. This is just the kind of putting into practice what they want to happen. Actually, we haven't seen how the real fallout is going to come, which is when they start to try and put people on the planes. And of course, that's before we get to what happens in the House of Lords, and presuming that the House of Lords do what it normally does, which is they make a big fuss about it, but then very quickly get sort of picked off. The real test of this policy is going to be when they start trying to actually deport people. And there's still a lot of people within government that are very sceptical about how successful that's going to be. And I think at that point, you're going to see more people kicking off again. If it turns out that actually it is open to legal challenge, that people don't end up on those planes, that it doesn't actually ever happen, I think that's when you're going to see more divisions open. Because really, this has been an incredibly painful exercise for the government. And if it comes to naught, then I think you're going to see people getting really, really angry.
But look, from Rishi Sunak's perspective, right, he's got this policy that does, whether you think it's mad or not, does address an issue that lots of people are worried about. He's got a policy, he's managed to force it through the House, he's seen off a rebellion. There are actually very few people who voted against it in the end. So he's managed to get it through, it is going to the Lords, he's faced down his critics and his party, and he's at 20% in the polls. He must be tearing his hair out. You know, I mean, what else is he meant to do apart from have better policies?
Well, I mean, one of the things I find particularly interesting about this is that they made this the policy that they sort of wanted to die on a ditch in.
Yeah.
And, there's lots of people up and down the country who would say, yes, immigration is important to a group of people. But actually, if you look at most of the polling that's been done over the course of the past year or so, and actually if you look at a poll we did over Christmas, which kind of looked at really what the issues are that people care about, immigration was not one of the top two issues. The top two issues are still cost of living and the NHS. And so actually, when people are sort of out there, feeling the pinch after Christmas, cost of, their shopping basket is still rising, their mortgages, they're still paying more for. I think they would be sitting there wondering actually whether the government is doing things which really do address those fundamental challenges that they face.
But you can see that, I can see that. So the question is why they can't see that. Why is there this focus? Is it because, I mean, is it the sort of the Lord Frost thing? Is it because they are deliberately pitching themselves at the voters that they fear losing to Reform UK and they're going that way? Or is it just because Rishi Sunak isn't very good at politics?
Well, it's both of those things, it's sort of. I mean, I think, yes, they do want to continue to pitch to those red wall voters. They've clearly worked out that actually small boats is an issue for those red wall voters in the North and Midlands, and something that they want to be able to offer them a bone on. But at the same time, they're very much boxed in about what they can do. The state of the economy isn't as robust as it could be. Interest rates, yes, they're coming down. But there isn't a huge amount of headroom for them to take on some of those economic challenges that maybe could give some sort of instant relief to people in the way of tax cuts, for example, because there's simply not the finances in place to do that. So they are both boxed in, but it is also a product of their own decisions that they've ended up in the mess that they have.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, stay with me, Caroline, because we've got something to play you. Because how does Keir Starmer feel about the boring tag? Well, the election guru John Curtis, as he's forecast a low election turnout because both leaders are dull as dishwater. The Labour leader was on TalkSport this morning, and the presenters Max Rushton and Charlie Baker wanted to know what he feels about being called boring.
Look, I've been called so many names in the course of my professional career, particularly since I went into politics. If boring is the best anyone can come up with, then I'll take that any day of the week.
Yeah, I agree. I'd take boring.
Also, I mean, the other thing I just say, I obviously go around the country all the time. I love talking to people in their community, where they work, just absorbing what they got to say to me and letting them talk to me in any way they like. And nobody yet I've been in politics 9 years, nobody has said, I'll tell you what, I want, can you tell me a joke?
Yeah.
Or what I want from a Prime Minister is someone who's really entertaining. Yes. I mean, we have actually tried that version of being a Prime Minister and it didn't really work very well.
See, I don't think Keir Starmer has been called lots of things throughout his political career. I think he's just been called boring. But still, Caroline Wheeler, what did you think of that?
It's quite a boring answer, isn't it?
I mean, does it matter, the boring thing? So, like Jeff Norcott, who's often on this show, he describes Keir Starmer as the guy the guy your mum marries after she leaves your dad. You know, who sort of sits you down and says he's going to be firm but fair. And so he does have that kind of sort of that vibe of not much fun. Is it a boon, or is it? What do you think?
I mean, I've sat down with Keir Starmer on numerous occasions and found him incredibly, good to talk to. You know, he's interesting. He's got, interesting things to say.
Well, I've seen him speak to small groups, and he's magnetic.
Yeah.
But then so was John Major.
Well, exactly. And I mean, some people just don't cut across. I mean, Gordon Brown famously really didn't cut across in terms of his media appearances. I think, Sir Keir does struggle sometimes to kind of connect, particularly on camera. Although I thought the series that Anushka Asthana did with him, the up close and personal, I felt like we did see a bit more of the kind of real Keir. And so he does sort of cut across in that way. But look, I mean, what do we want from our politicians? From my perspective, we've seen two Prime Ministers before Rishi Sunak, where, there was a sense that we were kind of flying by the seat of our pants quite a lot. And what would happen from one week to the next, you were never quite clear of. And people didn't seem to like that. The economy certainly didn't like it, the uncertainty that came with that. And I do wonder why the kind of cult of personality became such a kind of big issue when, actually strong and stable tends to suit countries better, particularly when we're not only engaged in conflict on numerous continents, but also we have a kind of economic headwind, which is not particularly helpful at the moment. And I would have thought that actually having a serious politician, and don't forget, Rishi Sunak, isn't exactly Mr. Charisma himself either. And his message has been very much about wanting to be sort of serious, to stop the kind of sugar rush of politics that we had under both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. And so I do think that really out there is a kind of appetite for our politicians to be a bit more serious. But at the same time, the public also wants somebody they can go for a beer with. And I'm not sure those two things are necessarily always compatible.
Well, so I wondered, because there does seem to be a bit of a push from Keir Starmer and from Labour at the moment to, get the public to understand the real me. This is who I am. Like I am fun. I play football, etc. And I wondered if that's partly because there's a worry that if they don't do that, it'll be done for them. Because you can see the various Tory attacks gearing up to portray him as a more radical figure than he likes to portray himself, and more to the left figure, with all the stuff harking back to his legal career and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if he's just sort of worried that there's a bit of in the public perception, a personality void there. And if he doesn't fill it himself, it's going to be filled by something that he's less keen on.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think there is a sense that, there were kind of several phases in his kind of reinvention of Labour, which sort of started with changing the party and then changing the policy. And the latter part of it is getting to know him and getting to know what he stands for. And that's very much where we are in the cycle of the Labour Party at the moment. But I think also the thing that's coming across more and more and actually is becoming more of a kind of USP for him, particularly given that, his direct challenger is the Prime Minister. Minister is that he's a normal guy.
Yeah.
You know, he's somebody that does hail from pretty humble roots. He is somebody like millions of others that, you know, will go and watch the football of a weekend. You know, that Christmas photograph we saw of him standing with his wife in front of the Christmas tree at the pub that they go to round the corner. You know, again, this is something that millions of people up and down the country can identify with.
Yeah.
And I think that that's actually quite an effective medium to show the kind of dividing line with the Tories, particularly when you have a kind of billionaire prime minister there who doesn't do those things. He doesn't drink. You know, he's not particularly active in terms of sport. He doesn't necessarily do those things that ordinary people do day in, day out in this country. And I think that is deliberate on the part of the Labour Party to show that Keir does understand how people live their everyday lives.
So we've a text while we've been talking from Catherine. She says, I don't mind him being boring. I do mind him having no convictions. Not that Sunak does either, but it's not a battle of honourable titans. Now, I think that's really interesting because I think Keir Starmer clearly does have convictions, but I'm not sure he wants us to know what they are.
Well, that's an interesting point in itself. I mean, I think he does have convictions. I think he's very clear about what he wants for this country. He has set out a vision, particularly in terms of the Green Prosperity Plan, which does appear to be unravelling somewhat at the moment. But you know, a need to transform Britain's economy so that it's delivering growth for the first time. But I think that there is a kind of disconnect that people feel, which is that I think there's been so much kind of political noise for so long. I think it does make it harder to cut through than it ever has done, because there's just been so much scandal and so much attention to what's been going on, that when people are saying things a bit more quietly, a bit more subtly, a bit more, you know, in a bit more of an understated way, I do think it's harder for people to hear.
Yeah. Well, so on some policy before I let you go, in the front of the Times today, or certainly in the Times today, Jeremy Hunt is considering extending child benefit to hundreds of thousands of middle-income families. The Times reports that the Chancellor could do this alongside an expected package of tax cuts in the spring budget. Now, this takes me back. I remember when they cut child benefit from hundreds of middle-income families. Now they're going to bring it back again.
I mean, again, we're talking in the same sort of territory as we were with inheritance tax. You know, this is a group of people that they clearly believe, you know, would more naturally be Conservative supporters, and they want to offer them a bone before the election. I mean, actually, I'm sort of surprised that they would want to do that rather than maybe looking at the thresholds, which is actually, I think, where people really feel the pinch more. But that obviously is a more expensive policy. And as we were just saying, you know, they are rather boxed in by the numbers and the headroom at the moment. So they've got to do kind of incremental things, which maybe are, you know, broadly speaking attractive, but perhaps don't change the kind of the way people feel necessarily about money in their pockets in the way that a bigger change would.
And look, one more before I let you go. The Times also reports today that US generals are warning that the UK military is getting too small to fight. This has been obviously going on for well, years, if not decades. Is there, I don't know, is there sort of clear political water here? Is there a difference over the parties? Is our military really likely to become a significant aspect in our politics? Because it sort of hasn't been for a while.
It hasn't been for a while, but I think you can see it kind of ratcheting up the agenda. And, you know, already we've seen the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, sort of making clear statements of intent that he believes that we have not invested enough in our defence capabilities, and actually wants to see us reach kind of 3% of GDP, which is far and above what we've already committed to, because he thinks that the threats that we face, both in the Middle East and also with a resurgent Russia, are so great that we will need to invest in our armed forces. And I actually think, interestingly, Labour are pretty much on the same page. I spent some of my time in Lebanon last week with the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and I think there is a party there that is more than aware of the threats that we face.
Thank you very much indeed, Caroline Wheeler. And you can read more from Caroline in the Sunday Times tomorrow and all other Sundays.